Hello, students, and welcome to Mr. Martin and Mr. Walters, Part 2, the French Revolution. We're going to look at the radical days of the Revolution.
Alrighty, guys, in your yellow packets, look at Part 3, The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794. Mr. Walters is going to start with a little background before we get to question number 1.
So you can see from our icons here, we have people being beheaded, we have Robespierre right in the middle, and then on the right, we have actual beheaded heads of people that must have been enemies of the state. So let's get to how the monarchy gets abolished. And this is a little bit before we get to actually number 1. So as a little background, by August 10th of 1792, there was an outbreak of violence. A crowd of Parisians stormed the Tuileries and slaughtered the king's guards. That's where the king had lived. And the royal family then flees this place to go to the Legislative Assembly. The September massacres happen, and this is when citizens, regular normal citizens, will attack the prisons that held nobles and priests of the First and Second Estate, and they'll just slaughter them right on the spot.
Oh man, sounds fun. Alright, question number 1. What was the name of the government that replaced the French monarchy? Well, this is known as the National Convention. Alright, the radicals take control of the National Assembly. They call for a new election, and they create a new legislative body, and this is called the National Convention. They extend the right to vote, which is called suffrage, to all male citizens. Remember, we said that previously you had to own property. Well, now they're going to extend it to all male citizens.
Oh, and then, so this first act of the new National Convention is what to do with the king and the queen. Remember from the last video, they're now looked upon as traitors. Well, they put Louis on trial, and it's very quick and one-sided, and they decide he is in fact a traitor, and they condemn him to death, and they execute him. A couple months later, they say Queen Marie Antoinette had bankrupted the country. She should also be put on trial. She is found guilty, and she is also executed. And that is the end of the King and Queen of France.
Alright, so now the National Convention has what's called the Committee on Public Safety, and this is going to be the answer to number 3 if you're following along in your notes. The Committee on Public Safety was a 12-person committee that had almost absolute power. They were led by a man by the name of Maximilien Robespierre, and he was the leader of the Committee on Public Safety, and his nickname among his allies was called the Incorruptible. However, his enemies thought of him as a tyrant because he exercised absolute power, and he will put to death, which is why they call it the Reign of Terror, he will put to death anyone who he feels is a threat to the French Revolution.
As a matter of fact, people would sometimes go out into the streets of Paris and say, do you like the revolution? And if you said no, you would be condemned as a traitor and be killed and executed right away. But if you said yes and you weren't enthusiastic enough with how you said yes, you could also be killed and put to death for that.
There's a common phrase in our lexicon that says, heads are going to roll. Well, that goes back to the French Revolution, from the time where many members that were a threat to the revolution were executed by the guillotine. And when their heads came off, their heads rolled.
All right, so more on the National Convention and the Reign of Terror. Robespierre is primarily responsible for this series of hasty trials that sends many people to the guillotine for being accused of treason. Just to give you some numbers, between July of 1793 and July of 1794, close to 40,000 people die for not supporting the revolution. However, eventually, the people themselves get sick of this, and they put Robespierre on trial, find him guilty, and he is executed just like all the people he put on trial.
Alright, and here's a little side note on the guillotine, and that was invented by Dr. Joseph Guillotine, and this was considered actually to be a very humane way of executing a person because of the blade being on a 45-degree angle. When it enters your neck, it cuts the nerves and kind of gives you a quick and painless death.
So they tell us.
Alright, outside of the radical days, okay, the revolution moved away from the radical days of the National Convention, and they created a 5-man directory to rule France. The directory held its power from 1795 to 1799. However, at this time, the directory was weak, and it was very hard at solving France's problems. They were very ineffective, kind of like the Articles of Confederation was in the United States. All right. Because of this weakness in the directory, a young general by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte begins to gain power as a member of the directory, and he will eventually overthrow that directory in a coup d'etat and become France's sole leader. And we will talk about the rise of Napoleon in class when we finish up the French Revolution. Part 5, Napoleon, hero or villain?
If you feel like we've gone too far, at any time you can replay this video to get the correct notes. Otherwise, have a good evening and we'll see you in class.